I'm sorry, they're not worth the paper they're written on. You see, environmental impact statements are undertaken by consultants hired by and paid by the mining companies. Of course they're biased. In practice, the hired consultant becomes an advocate for the mining company. Indeed, the environmental impact statement generally looks more like an operating manual than a critical and dispassionate analysis of long-term social, ecological and economic cost. Indeed, the terms of reference for these environmental impact statements assume that the proposal will go ahead. There is always a presumption in the terms of reference applied to mining proposals that the associated activity will have social benefits to the local community. There is no peer review of these so-called environmental impact statements. Why isn't there a health impact statement? Why aren't there food security impact statements? This year Anna Bligh went to Warwick, her birthplace, to help them celebrate their 150th birthday. Did she tell them that Altera Resources have a mining exploration permit that includes the entire town of Warwick? And then, with all of the mining, there's the question of water. Interesting, earlier this year, the former Chief Executive of Woodside Petroleum, one of Australia's biggest mining companies, Don Volti, who left the company earlier in the year after 6 years as CEO, told a Business Leaders Forum on the day he left that he'd like to be remembered for his decision not to pursue coal seam gas, and he said he would sleep easy because of it. He said, and I quote, "Come back and check 4 or 5 years from now. I think one of the greatest things I will have achieved is not taking my company into coal seam methane." Well, you take the water issue. Coal seam gas mining is forecast to use 300 gigalitres a year from the groundwater system. A gigalitre is 1 billion litres. It's equivalent of 500 Olympic swimming pools. 300 gigalitres is 150,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and that's extracted by coal seam gas mining every year. Will 300 gigalitres lower water levels in the aquifers? The 300 gigalitres a year would be more than half as much as is presently extracted from the Great Artesian Basin each year. And this is called a conservative estimate. And it was in a submission from the National Water Commission that, amongst hundreds, brought to the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry in relation to coal seam gas. Interestingly, the Murray River area now has what are called Murray storages. Dams, Dartmouth Dam, Hume Dam, Yarrawonga Weir, Torrumbarry Weir. They're almost 100% full, thank God, they are. But farmers are only allowed 71% of their water entitlement. The miners get every bit they want. There is no limit on the amount of water available to miners. There is no limit on the amount of land that they can clear. In a recent Senate hearing looking at the impact of mining coal seam gas within the Murray-Darling Basin, Senator Bill Heffernan's committee was told, and they're investigating this whole issue, that mining at just one Queensland site would produce 3 million tonnes of salt, enough to raise a pile 10 metres high and 11 kilometres long. And that's 7,000 wells. But there are going to be 40,000 wells in Queensland. There are 72 coal seam gas wellheads out Camden Way, right in the suburbs of Sydney. A company called Dart Energy is beginning to drill for coal seam gas under Sydney at St Peters. That's the first drilling. At St Peters, do you mind? And if they're allowed to go into production, gas wells will need to be drilled every few kilometres and connected by gas lines. There are over 13 trillion cubic feet of gas lying under Sydney. So the gas company is already into urban Sydney. What's to be done about the polluted water? Salt water can permanently destroy land. Then there's the introduction of chemicals and other pollutants into the aquifers. Surely if you have a process that carries such risk, there has to be a moratorium until we find out the truth. The whole coal seam gas issue is completely out of control. Governments in Canberra, Queensland and New South Wales are taking mining companies' money and giving them a licence to do whatever they want. I've spoken to Marion Lloyd-Smith on my radio program. She's from the National Toxics Network. She said the network's review of chemicals used by the coal seam gas industry has found that only 2 out of the 23 most commonly used fracking chemicals in Australia have been assessed by the National Industrial Chemical Notification and Assessment Scheme. Surely there's got to be a comprehensive hazard assessment carried out for all coal seam gas mining and all chemicals, and information is coming in every day about all of this, the chemicals used in the process, including their impact on human health, their impact on air, on groundwater and on water courses. Surely we need a comprehensive health assessment of all chemical releases associated with coal seam gas activities. We're talking about people's lives here. And we need to investigate the long-term impacts of the industry in terms of clean-up and remediation of contaminated areas, the treatment of wastewater, groundwater impacts, the increased landfill capacity to dispose of coal seam gas waste products. None of that is known to anyone. The New South Wales Government's own Department of Planning has acknowledged that BTEX chemicals are a component of diesel fuel and that diesel fuel is used as a base for many of the drilling fluids. That diesel-based drilling fluids are common. I've heard your point, but I've got something to say. BTEX, this is a national issue. I welcome the chance, but the story is not yet finished, if you don't mind. Sure you don't. BTEX, we won't be long. BTEX, B is for benzene, one of the BTEX chemicals. Well, the Department of Health and Human Services has determined that benzene is a known human carcinogen. It causes cancer. Ethylbenzene, that's the E, is described by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as carcinogenic to human beings. Julia Gillard had a COAG meeting a couple of weeks ago. Her top water advisor, the National Water Commission, had urged the Prime Minister and the Premiers to put on the COAG agenda the risk that water systems face from coal seam gas projects. Not a squeak at COAG. But the Gillard government is in possession of a report documenting the risks to our water systems from coal seam gas. And the government's own National Water Commission is warning of the impact of coal seam gas on water quality. James Cameron, the Chief Executive of the National Water Commission, said that the burgeoning coal seam gas industry has the potential to deliver significant economic benefits, quote, but there are also significant potential risks to water and our water management as a result of the scale of the development of the sector. Government don't seem to care about the risk to water quality, the risk to health. The government is just grabbing revenue. And it's clear there is a threat to Australia's agricultural land, and yet governments have nothing on their minds but the rivers of royalty. The Australian Petroleum Production and Exploration Association has conceded that coal gas extraction will inevitably contaminate aquifers. At a meeting in Sydney in August, a spokesman for that association said, quote, drilling will to varying degrees impact on aquifers. The extension of impact and whether the impact can be managed is the question. This is Sydney, do you mind, in the middle of Sydney. And here we are talking about the potential contamination of underground water supplies, to say nothing of the exhaustion of them, as mining companies take what they like and to hell with everything else. Now the New South Wales Government says we might start to do something. May I just say to you, this is, to me, the biggest issue facing this country. We are talking about public health. Now, I could go on forever documenting what that means to the people in the Hunter Valley, but already there are experts who say that children born there are underperforming academically as a result of what has happened by the ingestion of toxicity from mining in the Hunter Valley. Public health. We're talking about the massive diminution of the availability of water. We're talking about the contamination of water, and then, of course, all of this on prime agricultural land across Australia at a time when a former Prime Minister has talked about the importance of food security. If this isn't a major issue facing this country, and if this isn't something that galvanises all Australians, including the media and politicians, then I'm simply saying Australia is in for a hell of a lot of trouble down the track. Thanks.